In 1993, NASA launched the ill-fated Mars Observer for the purpose of thoroughly photographing the Martian surface. Despite intense public interest in the face and surrounding features, NASA had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into an agreement that the face region would be photographed. Even then, NASA said it may or may not release any such photos to the public, most likely because it didn't want to add fuel to the ET fire, a point made moot when the Mars Observer allegedly disappeared. Researcher Don Ecker is convinced that NASA has been taken over by the military.
The fact that NASA over the last couple of years have been slowly but surely clearing out their civilian research personnel and have been bringing in retired military personnel. What this suggests is that NASA is going black.
Journalist Ecker points to a 1991 mission of the Space Shuttle Discovery, STS-48, as an example of NASA's participation in a cover-up. This footage was taped from NASA's own satellite signals. It shows several anomalous objects floating in space near the shuttle, objects which NASA says were ice crystals, space debris, or both. But analysis by some of NASA's own consultants casts serious doubt on these excuses. At one point, the footage clearly shows an object make a radical shift in direction, in apparent response to a flash of light emanating from the shuttle. Here's the sequence again. Notice two other objects streaking across space at incredible speeds. Self-propelled ice crystals, or are they something unexplainable?
These objects, in fact, were not ice, were some type of manufactured vehicle, and they demonstrated a propulsion system that we presently on Earth either are not aware of, or if there are elements within the government that is aware of it, they're keeping it under wraps.
To some, this sequence of events suggests a hostile inner space encounter between a U.S. space shuttle and UFOs. To others, it's another in a long string of inconsequential sightings of space junk. The question of whether American astronauts have seen UFOs was settled long ago, even though no astronauts, current or former, are willing to talk about the subject today. Of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, at least 3 reportedly saw anomalous objects. John Glenn saw sparkling fireflies dancing around his capsule. The late Deke Slayton said he repeatedly circled a stationary UFO while piloting a fighter plane. And Gordon Cooper was so certain that the craft he witnessed several times while flying over Europe were of extraterrestrial origin that he wrote a letter stating his opinion to the United Nations. Cooper has since recanted his statement but refuses to answer any questions about what he saw or why he changed his mind. In fact, none of the astronauts who supposedly saw anomalous objects were willing to respond to inquiries, including astronauts Frank Borman and James Lovell, who snapped this photo of 2 luminous objects from space, or James McDivitt, who confided in friends about his own UFO sightings while in orbit.
They can't even tell their spouses, and I either get no answers or I get a very emotional response, almost embarrassment that, you know, that I even ask the question. It's kind of ironic. It's one of these catch-22 situations. If you know, you can't tell. If you don't know, you don't know anyway.
UFOs have reportedly been monitoring human technology for decades, perhaps centuries. They've followed our planes and experimental vehicles, have been spotted adjacent to rocket and missile tests, and have done the same all over the world.
What I have been told off the record by certain former members of the American space effort was that not only have there been UFOs encountered in many space flights and with the Russians, but that the Americans and the former Soviet Union had a very close covert relationship, working hand in hand in the pursuit of the overall UFO phenomenon.
Under communism, Soviet leaders publicly scoffed at UFO reports, suggesting the whole matter was a capitalist plot. At the same time, the Russians sometimes used UFOs for their own propaganda purposes.
They had launch sites that were secret, and when they launched a rocket, they encouraged the people in the area to believe that what they had seen in the sky was a flying saucer. They actually planted those stories. I think we've done the same thing.
But the Russian military clearly knew that UFOs were real. Hidden in the archives of the Ministry of Defense is solid evidence of Russian UFO encounters, on Earth and in space. What's more, the Russian government knows that the American government knows. Because the Soviets got a jump on the U.S. in the space race, they also had the first outer space UFO sightings. Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, reportedly saw UFOs during his flight, but said he was not permitted to talk about it. The second Russian in space not only saw UFOs, but filmed them. One frame of that film, showing several UFOs dancing around the capsule, was published in a Soviet magazine years later. Scientist Ramily Avramenko, one of the chief designers of Russia's Star Wars program, says the Soviet government knew UFOs were from somewhere else since day one of the space race.
At
that time, satellites in space were easily countable, but we also saw vehicles whose technical characteristics we cannot match even now. We saw tens of these in 1959. Surely the existence of these vehicles caused problems for the U.S. defense systems, because you are faced with this information as well.
These still classified Ministry of Defense documents, never before seen in public, reveal that Russian spies learned a great deal about UFO encounters involving American astronauts. The Russians are convinced there were several direct encounters with UFOs while American astronauts were on the moon, and that the Americans haven't returned to the moon because we were told to stay away. Several high-ranking military and scientific sources confirm that the Russians knew much about the ongoing UFO cover-up in America. Retired Army Colonel Boris Sokolov was in charge of the Soviets' secret UFO projects for 10 years and says he knew that the U.S. military had constructed 40 UFO listening posts as part of its UFO research.
I think America could learn something. I mean, after we gave lessons to the Russians for 40 years about freedom and liberty and so on, and now they're publishing a lot of stuff. I doubted that they're publishing everything they have, but at least they are releasing a lot of material, and our military doesn't seem to have changed too much their attitude.
The big question about the UFO cover-up remains. Why? Some final thoughts on that are just ahead.
When is a secret not a secret? When everyone has heard it, but few pay attention. The UFO cover-up has been so well documented over so many years that it has seemingly become part of our popular mythology. It is not a myth. The government's own secret studies concluded decades ago that UFOs were real. Those studies were suppressed, then replaced by public relations shams. Schemes were hatched to ridicule the topic, to confuse the public, to hide the real information. An extensive paper trail reveals that many people had direct knowledge of the cover-up and that many others tried to get the information but were refused. Government agencies routinely lie about what they know. Other agencies issue ridiculous cover stories and disinformation. Scores of witnesses recall what may be the most important event in history. The government says nothing. Other witnesses, including some of our modern-day heroes, have seen the proof with their own eyes, but are ordered to keep quiet. Good people are threatened and harassed to maintain this non-secret secret. The best evidence makes it abundantly, indisputably clear that someone, somewhere, has a lot more information than the rest of us.
I think that there are people who must have, people in Washington and elsewhere, must have a building full of data that I think the scientific community should have. Data that comes from radar, from sensors on Earth, from sensors in the ocean, and from sensors in space. There is a cover-up in the sense that they are keeping that data to themselves. And I think the greatest secret may be that nobody has any idea what those objects are.